crush your enemies.
They drew first blood, not me.
See them driven before you.
Oh, my user.
And hear the lamentation of your women.
But I pity the fool.
Glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate.
Phone home.
They're here.
Oh, a real light sleeper, child.
Welcome to Vintage Video, where we're rewatching the 80s so you don't have to. We'll be reviewing every major film release of the 1980s in chronological order, overanalyzing what you've seen and spoiling what you haven't. I'm Patrick O'Reilly.
I'm Jesse Bayless.
And I'm Richard Wells.
And today we're discussing Wolf Lake, released April 16th, 1982. It was written and directed by Burt Kennedy and released by Film Corp Distribution. Between this film and last week's film, Jay Baruchel and Seth Rogen were born. April 9th and April 15th of 1982, really? Yeah. This was one of the first films produced by shopping mall magnate Melvin Simon's personal production company and originally planned as a Lee Marvin vehicle. Shooting began in the late 70s in Chihuahua, Mexico, playing the part of Canada, and the full cast had to be flown into the remote lake location. It screened for audiences in 1981 with the alternate title The Honor Guard, and apparently fights broke out in the theaters between audience members. Unclear if the fights were related to the plot of the film or just coincidence fights.
Yeah, because I don't get this movie at all because I don't care about what happens in this movie.
Yep.
And I can't, I mean, I'm sure it was a different time in 1980.
Yeah.
Or 81 or whenever they screened this film, but it was, like, I can't imagine anybody caring that much about
these characters
topics
in particular.
Of this film.
It was also adapted into a series in 2001 starring Lou Diamond Phillips, Tim Matheson, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and Graham Greene, except that it added a bunch of werewolves and it's not actually related to this film
I was
at all.
going to say, I don't know how you turn this into a series.
No, but it kept coming up when I would Google Wolf Lake. It's a show from the early 2000s.
Which is funny because when you look at the cover art for this movie,
it makes it look spookier.
I thought it was a horror film. The guy's face is like, he looks like a Frankenstein character because it's like a silkscreen version of him, but it's like toned green.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, he kind of looks like a Frankenstein type monster character. But
it's just an artist's conceptions of Rod Steiger's face. We open on Wolf Lake with a thin fog blowing out over the water. Panning across the surface, the camera comes to rest on a row of 4 log cabins on the shore. We hear the arrival of a small seaplane, and as we approach the lake from its perspective, we see the wildlife scattering, scared of the noise.
It's a very, very stock footage,
right?
Because it goes from like pretty good clarity to abysmal.
Yeah, what happened? It might also just be the kind of camera they were willing to hang from the bottom of a plane.
Yeah.
The plane touches down on the glassy surface of the lake, and the charter pilot slows to a stop at the dock. A title pops up to indicate this is Canada in the fall of 1976. The passengers on board climb out onto the dock and call to a 5th man named Jackson, who they expected to meet them here. The first man off is Charlie, played by Rod Steiger, and he ties the plane to a cleat. Charlie is annoyed not to see any sign of Jackson yet, and the pilot comments on the abundance of rifles they've brought along for their trip.
You guys gonna go hunting, or are you gonna start a war?
That may start a war. We may just well start a war if Jackson's left us up here high and dry.
Oh, dry hell! Don't drop that in the water, George. I hate to have to shoot you.
The other 3 passengers are George, played by Richard Hurd, Wilbur, played by Jerry Hardin, and Sweeney, played by Paul Mantee. They notice a couple emerging from the nearest log cabin, who will come to know as David and Linda. They explain they were hired by Mr. Jackson to clean up and operate the camp. David says Jackson should be back tomorrow, but Charlie's already pissed off because they can't go on their hunt without a guide, and he's just wasted a full day of their trip. Even in this brief interaction, Charlie and David are weirdly confrontational with each other. After confirming the cabins are all available, Charlie tells everyone where they'll be staying for the night, and without even asking, he volunteers Dave to help carry their supplies to the cabins, but he can't resist cracking a joke about Dave's hippie facial hair.
You are a boy, aren't you? I mean, with all that hair and beard, you could be a bearded lady.
I'm not.
I don't get that joke.
He has long hair, and only hippies have long hair. Everybody else has military cut-length hair.
But he doesn't have long hair.
It's long enough for him to be upset about it.
It's quite short, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not cut as short as the old men's hair.
I guess.
Charlie asks about the young woman he saw, and Dave explains they share a cabin, but they're not married. Strike 2 in Charlie's book. Christ doesn't like that.
I see.
No, you don't see.
Maybe I don't. You know what the trouble with your generation is? He's got no sense of humor.
The men finish unloading the plane and the pilot takes off. When he has David alone, Wilbur apologizes on Charlie's behalf, claiming he's a decent guy who turns sour when his plans are fucked with, so he takes it out on people. He explains further that they served in the military together where Charlie was his CO, and they've sort of maintained that relationship in civilian life. When Wilbur makes light of his own cowardice in wartime, David finally cracks a smile. Wilbur tries to pry a bit at the man's backstory, but David doesn't feel like sharing beyond admitting he served with the Airborne Division in the Army. We jump to that evening as the generator burns out for what must be the third or fourth time, and Charlie is annoyed that David hasn't fixed it yet. They suddenly notice David's girlfriend Linda doing dishes nearby and are instantly fantasizing about her.
If you could sell a dishwasher like that, you could make a fortune.
Well, them young ones sure let it all hang out, don't they?
George, you're a dirty old man.
You shove a pair like that in front of me, I am.
Charlie suggests Wilbur try to help David fixing the generator, and when he gets there, the two men have another private conversation. Wilbur starts with more self-deprecation to get on David's good side, but David quickly realizes that Wilbur is exaggerating his cowardice in the hopes that David will confess to some himself.
Somebody fire a shot, I'd probably turn tail and run.
That can happen.
Oh, it happened to you?
To end the conversation here, David claims the generator is actually in perfect working order, it's just out of gas. Why it took him so long to figure this out is crazy, but maybe he's lying so Wilbur will go back inside and leave him alone.
Yeah, because if this is like the third or fourth time that it's cut out, it's eventually just going to run out.
Like, how did you ever get it started again without adding gas? Either way, Wilbur interprets this response as a confession. Back in the cabin, Charlie approaches Linda to harass her. She informs him that she knows he called David a bearded lady and that he hates them both, but for whatever reason, he's embarrassed to admit it, and Charlie denies the accusation.
I also think that it's, like, his reaction here is so bizarre to me.
Charlie's?
Yeah. Like, it's just so visceral that he's just, like, instantly hates these people.
Well, it's a generational thing. I think that there were people who had thought this way about youngsters in the 60s and the 70s. And they just hated them on sight. And he was mad that his plans have been messed with, and now he has to deal with this guy who he's now relying on to get things done, and he doesn't appreciate it.
Yeah, it's just hard for me to track that because it just seems so out of place.
She asks him to leave her alone, and on his way out of the room, he claims he just wanted to get to know her better.
Why? Because I have tits?
Oh, come on, don't be ridiculous.
You want to see him?
She flashes her breasts at him, and he's enraged to have his baser instincts called out like this. When he calls her a bitch, she slaps him hard, and even after Sweeney shows up to ask if anything's wrong, Charlie returns the favor.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
She's shocked by his retaliation.
I don't know why she's shocked.
Yeah, well, I think she's surprised that he did it in front of the other guy without explaining himself. In the cabin that night, Linda tells David about the slaps and begs him not to pick a fight with Charlie over it, conveniently leaving out the bit about flashing the guy. In Charlie's cabin, it's clear Wilbur is disturbed by the rising tensions, and he suggests they make an early exit. Charlie won't hear it. Wilbur takes the inadvisable action of squealing to Charlie that David is a deserter from the U.S. Army and the 82nd Airborne.
Also, I don't know how they could leave.
Yeah, because they don't have a plane.
Yeah, they don't seem to have. Because this whole time, I don't think we never see a radio, or they never smash a radio to prevent people from calling for help.
There's no way to communicate. Charlie goes deathly cold and stares out the window at David and Linda's cabin. We hard cut to the next morning as Charlie fires a rifle at targets on the dock over the lake. After a few shots, Charlie calls to David to reset his targets, and then, as he's walking down the dock, Charlie puts David's head in his crosshairs. He fires at the first target the second David lets go of it.
Also, I think that this is just in poor taste in the not just shooting at David, but
putting him in the crosshairs in the first place.
Well, there's that, but also just shooting at the dock, just putting bullet holes in the dock. I mean, that's just you're just damaging the wood.
Yeah. David spins around shocked, and Charlie doesn't apologize or even pretend it was a mistake. He just stares David down. This would for sure be the last thing I or my girlfriend did for these men while they were here.
Right?
Sometime later, Linda stupidly makes use of an outdoor shower that is fully open on the side facing the old men's cabin. George and Sweeney quickly catch sight of the girl through a pair of binoculars. At the same time, Wilbur finds David doing some painting elsewhere on the property and shares that Charlie knows he's a deserter and David and Linda should leave before it leads to any more trouble.
Why don't they leave?
Because there's not a lot of places they can go. They're here hiding.
I guess.
But also, how do you leave this place? Seems like the only way to get in or out is either by plane or by a vehicle, which we have not seen any.
Yeah.
I don't know how they got here or where they get their supplies other than this plane.
At this point in the film, I can't tell yet if Wilbur is secretly evil or just an idiot, but there was no reason to share his theory with Charlie unless he wanted people to start shooting at each other. David doesn't care what Charlie knows and disregards Wilbur's warning. Wilbur pretends to be worried for their safety, even though he's the one who told Charlie everything.
That girl. I sure would hate to see anything happen to her.
So would I.
Then why don't you leave? Now.
You wouldn't understand.
If you didn't want anything to happen, why did you tell Charlie? Later, we see the old men drinking in a cabin, and Charlie points out that David is the same age as his son Danny, who didn't make it home from Vietnam. George and Sweeney don't understand his point until Charlie makes Wilbur share David's secret.
He's, hiding out up here.
What do you mean he's hiding out up here?
He's a deserter.
Who said so?
He said so.
Charlie's offended by David's existence and perceives all deserters as braggarts who consider themselves better than the war's fallen soldiers for having survived it. For some insane reason, hours later we see David rowing Charlie in a boat to the middle of Wolf Lake. Why would you agree to do anything for this person after he was shooting at you? Unapologetically. Wilbur and Sweeney stare across the water and worry out loud about Charlie's irrational behavior as of late. Sweeney thinks the best way to calm Charlie down is to apply alcohol to the situation.
Why don't we break out the scotch? I don't mean just the bottle. I mean the whole damn case. Let's get Charlie so drunk he doesn't know his ass from his elbow.
Yes, that is sure to help. Across the lake, Charlie and David have an honest conversation. Charlie says men from his unit fought in Nam, and even when things seemed impossible, they stuck it out. But David claims his unit had no choice. Charlie disagrees without any details of the situation, and David explains that he just did what he thought was right. Charlie implies that only fathers know right from wrong.
My son died in Vietnam. And you ran away.
I had my reasons.
The only reason you ran away was to save your ass.
Back at the cabin, Wilbur is refilling the generator with gas when shots ring out across the water and he freezes terrified. Late that evening, Wilbur stands on the shore with a lantern as the rowboat is paddled back to camp. From the current angle, we're looking at the boat dead on, so I can't tell if the rower is alone. But when it gets closer, we see David and Charlie standing to step off the boat. When they're alone together, Charlie confesses to Wilbur how tempted he was to shoot David, and Wilbur tries in vain to explain why it won't bring Danny back. The next day, we see Charlie doing more target practice off the end of the dock. Wouldn't it make more sense to do this on shore anyway? Shooting holes in Jackson's dock? Is this like revenge for what he did? Also, where is that guy? They said he was going to be a day late and he never showed up the second day. 100 yards away, David stares blankly at the water and shudders every time Charlie fires his weapon, as though suffering from PTSD. As the camera pushes into his face, we hear soldiers yelling, children crying, and explosions mixed in with the gunshots in David's memory.
So he went. Like, he was in war.
Right.
Like, he's a deserter. He wasn't a draft dodger.
Yeah, he wasn't a draft dodger, but he's a deserter.
Yeah. But, and like,
well,
I don't know.
And to what extent he's a deserter is unclear, because if you're in Vietnam,
you made it over there. Somehow you came back.
Yeah, exactly. If you deserted there, you would have had to have gotten back into the United States, which would have been difficult.
Well, he's not in the United States.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Wilbur takes a moment to point out that Charlie has never made a habit of firing on motionless targets.
As long as I've been coming up here hunting with you, I've never seen you take a shot at anything that was standing still. I mean, you hold your fire and give it a chance. That boy. He's standing stock still, Charlie.
Suggesting that killing David would be unsportsmanlike unless the man were on the run or fighting back. Later, we see Charlie sneaking into David's cabin and rapidly loading a shotgun with shells before hiding it under the bed. It seems like he's intentionally planting a loaded weapon to incriminate the man, or possibly to lure David into taking action, but why he waited to load it until he was already in this cabin is confusing. Almost instantly, David's here, and the men are arguing loudly about right and wrong. Charlie thinks he's a better person than David because he fought in the war and did exactly as he was ordered. David says his generation is trying to be better and calls Charlie an old man, which sets him off.
They fought in different wars.
Right.
Like, I think...
Completely different situations, different motivations for the wars.
Yeah, World War II and Vietnam were very, very different wars.
But before Vietnam, there were no wars like that. So
they didn't know.
Older people just couldn't even comprehend of a war that wasn't correct because the U.S. told us to do it, so it must have been correct.
Right.
He goes on a tirade about how David's generation are ruining the country by complaining about it instead of defending it with guns. George calls David a coward for not doing his part overseas, and David finally explains himself. He served as an observer with Charlie Company, 11th Infantry in Vietnam, 1968, suggesting he was present for the famous My Lai massacre, wherein U.S. Army soldiers raped and murdered an entire village of innocent people. Charlie claims that in the same position he would simply have killed his commanding officer and the whole disaster would have been avoided.
And let me tell you something else, and you get it straight. Not one of us ever believed in killing women or children.
You believed in what you were fighting for.
That's right, and I knew what I was fighting for. I was fighting for my life, my stupid little life.
I thought you were a patriot.
Unfortunately, for these most passionate moments of the film, I was distracted from Rod Steiger's words by the gels taped poorly on the outside of the cabin's windows to filter light from outside.
Is that what that was? They were just flickering the whole time. I was watching that too.
It must have been a windy day because it just looks like there's cellophane curtains on the outside of the glass just shaking violently throughout the shot. David is unimpressed with Charlie's declarations.
If bullshit were music, you'd be a brass band, Charlie.
Charlie ends the conversation by blatantly announcing David will not survive these woods, promising to kill him before he leaves. Wilbur and the boys watch Charlie walk from David's cabin to the end of the dock. Wilbur goes to check on him there, and Charlie says he worries too much. Wilbur reminds him he's been threatening murder, and Charlie says he wasn't joking about that.
Damn it, Charlie, you owe it to Danny.
Charlie doesn't appreciate Wilbur speaking on behalf of his dead son. Later, the boys are all sloppy drunk singing war songs in their cabin, except Charlie, who sits angry in a chair across the room. We cut to David's cabin where Linda lies in bed, but David stands at the window watching the other cabins. She reminds him that their opinion of his actions is irrelevant, and he can't pick a fight with everyone who claims he took the easy way out. She's worried his disagreement with Charlie will explode out of proportion.
He wants you dead. I've watched him. It's in his eyes.
What a man wants and what he gets isn't always the same.
And now he takes his darkest step so far and sort of turns the movie on its head. For this shot, David is lit dramatically so that only his eyes and mouth are visible, but a black shadow completely obscures the center of his face, making him look a bit like Voldemort.
Take Nam. The killings. I didn't stand by and watch. I was part of it. I like being part of it. I found myself waiting for it to happen again.
So not only was he present for the atrocities, but he participated in them and he enjoyed it. So now is he the bad guy? Are the old folks the good guys now? At least so far, it seems like we've just traded protagonists. Linda is disturbed by the confession and slowly lays back down. The camera slides down below the bed to remind us of the loaded shotgun on the floor. The drunken war songs fall apart when someone points out they fought in World War II, but they're singing World War I songs. Charlie takes the moment to point out there are no Korean War or Vietnam War songs. Maybe because the Korean War never really ended, and we lost the Vietnam War. Not a great atmosphere for songwriting when you're losing a war.
Well, and I think there are Vietnam songs, but they're all against the war.
Exactly. Which is probably why the best-known songs about Vietnam are protest songs like Fortunate Son or War What Is It Good For? The argument between the men eventually involves curse words, and Wilbur reminds them that kind of language is uncalled for because there's a woman around here somewhere.
It's literally talking about killing people.
Right. Charlie takes the moment to suggest a plan of action. He doesn't think David deserves to keep a woman like Linda to himself.
I don't think it's right that he should have all the fun.
What do you mean?
I think we should have some too.
Well, how are we going to go about that?
We just go get it.
Wilbur is terrified at what's become of Charlie and warns his friend that David isn't the coward that Charlie thinks he is.
He'll kill you, Charlie. You touch that girl, he'll kill you.
This feels like a bigger leap, though, too. To be upset about a guy who's a deserter and, yeah, you have a son, whatever. You have, like, this emotional attachment to this concept, which is why you're so angry at him, to then jump to, let's just go rape a woman.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the character that they're putting together, which is this guy has been basically driven insane by his guilt for sending his son to this war in the first place. He's sad about losing the kid, obviously, and he also has a lot of anger for the armies that his son was fighting against, and he considers a deserter of his own army to be a member of that other team. And so he hates this guy more than anything. Essentially, David might as well have killed Danny.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can get that, but then wrapping Linda into this, like, why?
It's to hurt David. That's why.
Okay.
And because obviously they want it, and she's been rude to them, so she deserves it in his eyes. Charlie calls for one last round of drinks, and then they stumble drunkenly outside to throw beer bottles in the air for George to shoot at in the night. David watches the obnoxious display and tells Linda he has to get her to safety. Hours later, we see the generator, and a hand reaches out to shut it off. David's eyes snap open in bed, immediately interpreting the generator dying as a portent of doom, even though it's been doing that for the last few days. For some reason, David's cabin is still very well lit, despite the generator being turned off. Like, too light to possibly be sleeping in. He calls to Linda to get dressed quickly. Suddenly, rocks, or maybe beer bottles, are being thrown through every window of the cabin simultaneously. George busts in through one door, and when David and Linda turn to face him, Sweeney smashes down the door behind them and knocks David unconscious with a bottle over the head. Together, the old men wrestle Linda into the bed and tear her clothes off. Charlie and Wilbur enter last. Charlie is silent and angry, and Wilbur looks embarrassed and scared. Charlie orders Wilbur to join the men in raping Linda. Wilbur refuses to participate, disobeying a direct order from his commanding officer, so Charlie takes his gun and puts it in Wilbur's face to force him into the bed. So now, the same day he claimed he would kill a commanding officer that forced him to rape and kill women and children, he's ordering his own men to do the same thing. And obviously, the old men are not the good guys in this story either. Seems like everyone's pretty awful, except for Linda. Weird coincidence that most stories devolve into men just being monsters that inflict ruin on everything they touch.
Yeah, weird how that happens.
Crazy coincidence. The camera slowly pushes into Charlie's face as he watches the attack unfold, but we never see him directly participating. The next morning, David regains consciousness on the floor of the cabin, and beside him we see Linda, naked, splayed across the bed. She's motionless and mostly obscured by blankets, except for her legs and vagina, to remind us how she was used the night before, in case we forgot. David climbs to the side of the bed and pulls the covers over her to hide her nudity. He lifts her into his arms, and we see for the first time she's not dead. She cries into his shoulder, and he tries to comfort her.
Yeah, I 100% thought she was dead in this
right,
scene.
Yeah.
Because she's not moving at all. And then he lifts her up, and I'm like, oh, her hand moved. I'm like, oh, wait. Oh, more of her's moving.
Oh, it's
Never
okay,
mind.
I
Never
guess.
mind. She's alive. Okay.
Considering how the rest of the trip is gone, I half expected the film to just cut to them making breakfast for the old men and pretending nothing had happened. David fully dresses Linda and finds the shotgun under his bed. The temptation to avenge her overtakes him, and he immediately breaks out the window and fires on Charlie's cabin. Linda turns to run for the hills, and David chases after her.
Without the gun?
Did he not bring the gun?
No.
Oh,
Which
that's
seems
a weird
silly.
choice.
Like,
maybe he's just not thinking.
and also, let her run. You run the other direction. Just kill the guys that were after her, and then you can go after her.
You got the drop right now. Charlie orders Wilbur to give him his gun, but when he turns around, he sees Wilbur is dead against the wall with a bullet hole in his forehead. I think we're supposed to feel bad since he was ostensibly the nice one, but we definitely don't because this entire situation is Wilbur's fault. Charlie, George, and Sweeney load their guns and march down the dock to the boat, prepared to retaliate. Taking the boat seems like a weird choice since they would be restricted to the lake in their movements, but I guess the logic is that they couldn't catch up on foot, and Charlie also drops a bit of exposition to imply that David and Linda have no choice but to stay within shooting distance of the water.
They don't have a choice. They have to stick to the lake till they make their swing to the south. That's the only way they can get out of this part of the country.
Charlie.
What?
I think we're making a mistake.
You go tell Wilbur that. You go to Wilbur and say, Wilbur, I think we're doing the wrong goddamn thing.
Turns out George and Sweeney are taking the boat, and Charlie is following on foot to flush them toward the lake. We cut to David dragging Linda full speed through a rocky outcropping. This chase is something of a tortoise and the hare situation because David and Linda are flying through the wilderness and Charlie is just wandering at a quarter-mile an hour through the trees. Of course, he quickly catches up with them and begins shooting at the couple, which, just as he planned, forces them out into the lake somehow. They hide in some tall reeds, but they're quickly flanked by George and Sweeney in the boat and Charlie on foot wading out into the water.
I feel like the second that they got into the water, they'd be going so slowly because they're
Right?
like waist
Yeah.
deep in this water. I'm like,
Yeah.
why is he not getting a shot off right now?
Yeah, this is an insanely dumb place to hide for them. By the time the old men close in on them, they've already made a run back to shore. Charlie notices from their tracks in the sand that they've doubled back to the cabins. Linda notices a body under a blanket has been propped up on the dock. And because they couldn't see the faces of the men who were just hunting them, they don't know until they whip the blanket off that this is Wilbur. I would be more worried that one of the men was posing as a body with a gun, ready to do exactly this.
Yeah, and then we see that they're all already back.
Right.
I was like, how did they get back?
That's impossible.
I guess I don't know where the cabin is in relationship to where they are at the lake.
Yeah.
Like if they're on the complete opposite side of the lake and they could just row across it. But it just seems like they're just down the shoreway, you know?
Like they were literally ahead of them running back to the cabins and then the boat's here already.
Mm-hmm. And they would have seen the boat.
Yeah,
so
they would have seen him going
known.
by and shooting at them.
Yeah.
George and Sweeney watch them through the window, and Charlie looks practically asleep between them. David moves around the cabin loading multiple guns to prepare for another shootout. Luckily, he's got like 12 rifles on the wall in here. Why did he need to have a gun stashed under the bed when there's so many guns already in this cabin?
I think David and Linda went to one of the other larger cabins.
Oh, so they traded cabins.
Yeah, because David and Linda's cabin is like one room.
Right.
Now they're in a cabin that has like a
with all the guns these old men brought.
Yeah.
Okay. Somehow the entire day passes and it's night again. I really wanted the film to end with an implication that David had shown up first and killed the lodge owner Jackson and just lied to everyone that he was hired to work here. In the dark of night, David barricades all the cabin doors with heavy wood furniture. I feel like the obvious move from the old men would be to light the cabin on fire and just wait in the woods for them to escape so you can shoot at them. Suddenly David hears something and we get inserts of the old men unscrewing light bulbs in their own cabin. Another disembodied hand throws the generator back on, and David's cabin is flooded with bright light as the old men open fire again, turning the cabin into Swiss cheese. David shoots out his own lights, and then the generator somehow explodes outside. Maybe because it was generating a lot of electricity with nowhere to send it. I don't know how generators work, but it doesn't look like anybody shot it.
I mean, I guess they're implying some kind of short circuit, but I don't think it would have just exploded.
Yeah. Now we see the old men outside rolling barrels of gasoline through the dirt. They set one on fire and roll it downhill toward the cabin, where it crashes through a window and then out the other side of the cabin, setting many fires inside along the way. David moves to the smashed open window to shoot at whoever's standing uphill from them, and George manages to shoot David in the chest. George returns to Charlie's cabin to voice his objections to this whole plan. He wants to leave now that he's already shot the guy they're hunting. Charlie gives George permission to leave, but predictably follows him with a gun. When Charlie finds George in his room, packing his things, he points his rifle at the man and fires a single shot. He returns to Sweeney in his own cabin.
What happened?
George is dead. I killed him.
Why?
He's a deserter.
Linda is tending to David's wounds with bandages in their cabin, and outside, Charlie and Sweeney kneel beside Wilbur's body, planning a new attack. But what they come up with makes absolutely no sense at all. Right away, David hears them, so they've already lost the element of surprise. Sweeney is creeping around on the roof of David's cabin. David can track the sound well enough to shoot through the ceiling at the man, when suddenly a chainsaw blade cuts through the roof. What is the plan here? If you're going to cut a new door in the locked cabin, it should be a door you could possibly enter through. Is this plan just to fall 14 feet into this room?
So I was trying to speculate what they were doing here.
Yeah.
I had a couple of thoughts. One, earlier, Sweeney had mentioned
that there was rot.
That the
dry
beams,
rot.
yeah, it's like all you would need to do is make a cut into one of those beams and the whole roof would come down.
Yeah.
A lot of dry rot setting in up there. It's the heat from the fireplace. It'll do that sometime. One of those burying timbers gives way, this whole goddamn roof will cave in.
okay, so he's trying to bring down the roof.
By standing on it?
That was the flaw in the logic. I was like, well, you're just going to fall through.
I love to stand on unstable platforms with a running chainsaw.
Yeah. But then it looked like more he was trying to cut some kind of door.
Yeah.
Which I guess would give him the high ground to shoot down into the cabin.
I don't know, but he cuts a full rectangle out of the ceiling, but he leaves like a huge window for them to shoot through at him.
Yeah. But then David, for some reason, climbs up into the rafters.
It's like you have a clear shot from down here, but he does go up after him.
Mm-hmm.
He climbs all the support beams so he can meet the invader as soon as he steps inside, but when Sweeney finishes cutting through the center beam of the roof, the wood framing comes crashing to the floor all around David. We get a quick shot up at the ceiling to see that David has managed to kill Sweeney, and his body hangs through the opening he just cut in the cabin roof. David is pinned to the floor now by heavy wood beams when Linda notices the glint of a rifle from outside, and Charlie shoots her through the chest. Charlie levels his weapon at the trapped David now, but before he can get a shot off, Linda manages to shoot Charlie in the chest with her last ounce of strength before dying. Charlie collapses against the wall, and as his vision of David blurs, he smiles to be reunited with his son Danny.
Danny? Oh, Danny.
He falls over on his side dead, and only now does David bother to unbury himself from the woodpile. He cries over Linda's body and picks her up to rock her in his arms. We freeze frame on a high angle of David holding Linda, and the drunken voices singing the earlier war songs fades back in. Then, we cut back to Wolf Lake at dawn, with the same fog rolling over the water where we started the film, before fading to black for the credits to roll. The end. Really disappointing ending.
Yeah.
Because the guy kind of gets a happy ending. He's reunited with his son. He thinks he did him proud. I feel like it would be funny if he was like, Danny, is that you? And David was like, yeah, Dad, I'm super disappointed in you. You're fucking terrible.
So, I was so mixed about the message of this movie.
Yeah.
What I was hoping all throughout the movie, I was like, I'm calling the twist right now. The twist is gonna be he was never a deserter. Charlie's gonna come in and kill.
They just made some assumptions. Yeah.
He made some assumptions. Charlie was gonna kill him and everybody. Everyone's dead. Charlie was the only person left alive. Jackson was gonna return and ask what happened. And it's like, oh, I caught this deserter. It's like, oh, he's not a deserter. He's a war hero. He's got a Medal of Honor. Like that he was gonna like spout off, and Charlie was gonna realize that he'd never just flat out asked.
Yeah.
About his just was mocking him and saying that, you know, people like you are scum and things like that.
Yeah. He's like, what are you talking about? That was your son. He got a face transplant after an explosion. I brought him here to surprise you. Where is David? That's the fake name he chose to surprise you. He loves you.
Also, yeah, I thought for sure Jackson was dead.
Yeah.
That he had killed Jackson and assumed ownership of this land.
Yeah, I think it would just be funny if at the end they just, like, he's like dumping all the old men in like the same hole, and then he's like goes and finds Jackson somewhere, and we're like, oh, he actually killed that guy and just took over the cabin unannounced.
This movie, there's no point to this movie.
The problem is that at the start of the film, you're like, okay, I get it. There's like generational trauma. There's this group of people don't get along with this group of people. They're being weirdly confrontational from the start, on both sides.
Yeah.
But right away, we're expected to side with the younger people because the older people are just harassing them constantly and doing weird shit around them. Then suddenly they turn it completely around when the guy's like, yeah, I'm glad I murdered and raped all those people in Vietnam. It's like, wait, what? You are? Okay. Hold on. Wait, which person am I rooting for then? Was I supposed to be on the old people's side the whole time and mad at you for being a deserter? And then they do the same thing that he did to Me Lai right here in this cabin. And it's like, okay, so what is the lesson? What is the message of the film?
Yeah.
Everyone's terrible.
Yeah.
It's like if at the end of Straw Dogs, like Dustin Hoffman breaks into a cabin and rapes a bunch of children. It's like, what? That he was the victim. Why is he suddenly the aggressor? I don't understand the flip-flop. I guess it's just humans are complicated. Deal with it.
Yes, the old human nature.
Yeah.
I did not enjoy this movie.
No.
And why was it? Was this like a 4K restoration? Because it's like really like cleaned up.
Yeah, no, it's well, the weird thing is that it's a high resolution and it's nice picture quality, but it's a weird color correction
Yes,
situation. Because it looks
absolutely.
70s. Like, it looks very, like...
Well, I thought it
like
was
blown
filmed
out.
in the 70s.
Well, it takes place in 76. Yeah, and maybe it wasn't...
Well, you said they started filming it in
Well,
the
yeah,
70s.
they did start shooting in Mexico in the 70s, but still, usually things get color corrected when they're getting a Blu-ray release, even if it's, post-release. But maybe they just decided, let's just retain what the
that's
film
good
print
enough.
looks like.
It's because you're filming in Mexico, and Mexico has to have that
yellow
yellowish
tinge.
tinge.
Yeah, Soderbergh didn't do anything. It just looks like that when you shoot down there. It's like the Coriolis effect, but it's like for Mexican film. So yeah, thumbs down, I think.
Oh, yeah, thumbs down.
I do feel like it's trying to be Straw Dogs, or like it, because there were a lot of like rape revenge movies around this time, and it's trying to be another one of them, but with a Vietnam story behind it, and I don't think it works. I feel like whatever they were trying to do, they kind of flubbed it, and so none of the characters resonate, and so I don't care about any of them. I don't want good things for any of them. And I don't know why Linda's here. If she's like, my fiance just admitted he's kind of a monster. Maybe I should just run in the middle of the night and not be here ever again.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't like anything about this movie.
What are we thinking Letterboxd?
I have it at 55 out of 58.
Okay.
It is below Silent Rage, but above Soggy Bottom USA.
Below Silent
That's amazing.
Rage.
Is that your same?
So mine is also below Silent Rage, but above Saki Bottom USA.
Oh, wow.
But my Wolf Lake lands at 50.
All right. Well, I have it in 35.
You love this one.
It's under The Last Shark and above Silent Rage.
Oh,
We
we
all
all
have
agree
it
it's
right
very
next to Silent
similar to
Rage.
Silent Rage.
Very Silent Ragey.
But Silent Rage has that amazing dog freezer story.
Yeah. I feel like this whole movie was one long dog freezer story. The writer-director here was Burt Kennedy. Before this, he directed The Return of the Seven, the sequel to The Magnificent Seven, not to be confused with The Return of the Secaucus Seven, which I don't think anyone would do. And he also directed Support Your Local Gunfighter. We've seen his work on the show directing Dirty Dingus McGee, and his last feature credit was for directing Hulk Hogan vehicle Suburban Commando. I saw hints of that in this. No, I didn't. The music here came from Ken Thorne. Before this, he was the composer on Inspector Clouseau, and so far on the show, Juggernaut, Superman 2. He's back this season to score The House Where Evil Dwells, Superman 3, Lassiter, and The Evil That Men Do. The cinematographer here was Carlos Montaño. This is his only DP credit. The other cinematographer was Alex Phillips Jr. He also lit Buck and the Preacher, The Devil's Reign, and so far on the show, Cabo Blanco, Fade to Black, Demonoid, Messenger of Death, and High Risk, which all of those but Fade to Black had scenes shot in Mexico, so maybe there was something in Fade to Black I'm forgetting was shot in Mexico. He's back this season to light Sorceress, and later Surf 2, and Alan Quartermain and the Lost City of Gold. The editor here was Warner E. Layton. He got started editing animation, including many episodes each of The Yogi Bear Show, Top Cat, The Jetsons, The Flintstones, Johnny Quest, and Space Ghost. He transitioned to live action to cut Gone in 60 Seconds, and he followed Wolf Lake by cutting Chomps and The Junk Man. Rod Steiger played Charlie. Steiger was the only man in the cast old enough to have actually served in World War II. Before this, he was in Dr. Zhivago, In the Heat of the Night, The Illustrated Man, Duck You Sucker, and Amityville Horror. We've seen him so far in a minisode review of Klondike Fever, and then back-to-back regular episodes Lion of the Desert and Cattle Annie and Little Britches. He's back just a few episodes from now in The Chosen, and later in Mars Attacks, The Hurricane, and End of Days. His final credit was as Nick in Pool Hall Junkies. David Huffman played David. We've seen him so far in a minisode review of Leo and Laurie, and eventually in a future minisode for St. Helens. And in our regular episode viewing, he was in Blood Beach. He's back this season as Buckholtz in Firefox. Robin Mattson played Linda. Before this, she's in Candy Striped Nurses, Phantom of the Paradise, Return to Macon County, and the late 70s Captain America movie. She's likely best known for her prolific soap opera career on 8 Bold and the Beautifuls, 24 As the World Turns, 27 Days of Our Lives, 100 All My Children's, 352 General Hospitals, and 1,045 episodes of Santa Barbara. Jerry Hardin played Wilbur. Before this, we've seen him in Sleeper, Earthquake, Honky Tonk Freeway, Reds, and Missing. He's back this season for a second Honky Tonk title, namely Honky Tonk Man, and later still, he shows up in Cujo, Falcon and the Snowman, Big Trouble in Little China, the Milagro Beanfield War, and the memorable role of Deep Throat in 11 episodes of The X-Files. Richard Hurd played George. Before this, he was in The China Syndrome. We've seen him now in Hercules in New York, Schizoid, and Private Benjamin, and later he shows up in Summer Rental, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and Gleaming the Cube. Much more recently, he appeared as Roman Armitage, the founder of the Order of the Coagula, in Jordan Peele's Get Out.
Behold the Coagula.
Behold the Coagula.
He was also President Cleveland on Briscoe County Jr. Richard Hurd, that's fun. Paul Mantee played Sweeney. Before this, he appeared in The Manitou, which is almost his name, but not. It's a combination of The Manitou and The Great Santini, both of which he was in. But it's mostly TV after this. Conrad Hool played the pilot. Not many acting credits I recognized, but he also has a handful of producing credits on films like Cabo Blanco, Pure Luck, The Air Up There, Flipper, McHale's Navy, Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, and Club Dread, which are probably all Mexico shoots also. At the very least, I know Cabo Blanco, Pure Luck, The Air Up There, Flipper, and McHale's Navy were, but I don't know about Crocodile Dundee or Club Dread. But it makes sense. I think that's everything for Wolf Lake. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share, you can find all our socials at linktree/vintagevideopod. If you enjoy what we're doing, consider giving us a review on iTunes. I don't believe it helps visibility, but it's good for morale. And if you really like the show, maybe you should join our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/vintagevideopodcast for access to all our monthly 70s reviews and a hand in choosing next month's film. Patrons are currently choosing between Brannigan, Deep Red, Escape to Witch Mountain, Funny Lady, The Great Waldo Pepper, Mirror, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Rancho Deluxe, Rosebud, Tommy, Terror of Mechagodzilla, or The Yakuza for a 50th anniversary review next month. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you'll join us next time when we'll be discussing Tag the Assassination Game, which IMDb describes like so. College assassination game turns deadly as someone starts playing for real. We leave you now with a trailer for Tag the Assassination Game.
Nice try, Nance.
How'd you know it was me?
You're the only one I know under 50 who wears that cheap perfume.
Funny. Well, it's always worked for me. Ugh, look at my hair.
There's a guy staring at you across the lawn.
Where?
The dark-haired one pretending to read.
Oh, yeah. His name's Randy Simonetti. He's my assassin. Cute, huh?
It's not my type.
Who is, dearie? Who is?